My girlfriend lied to me about going on the trip. Is it over? My girlfriend, Liv, and I have been together for about a year and a half. We took things slowly at first, exclusively dating before making it official a year ago. Things have generally been good between us, despite a few bumps in communication that she often attributes to her neurodivergence. She isn't great at texting, which threw me off at first, but I soon realized she's that way with almost everyone. Her friends, family, everyone. A bit of context here. Twice a year, Liv and a few of her friends attend a conference a few states away. It's a 2-day event, but they usually turn it into a 5-day trip since it involves a flight, a hotel stay, and it's held in a nice city. During these trips, her friend group is usually very active on social media, posting updates from flights to the conference to time at the beach. This weekend was supposed to be their 3rd time going. They'd had their flights and hotels booked for months, even posting about it on social media. Unfortunately, the conference got canceled, but they decided to go ahead and take the trip anyway since everything was already set. Liv and I had a date night last weekend, and she mentioned how excited she was for her trip. All seemed normal, but at the end of the night, I happened to catch a glimpse of her phone screen while she was on her airline app, seemingly looking at cancellation policies. I was tired, and I didn't want to seem nosy, so I didn't ask her about it. A few days later, I asked if we could hang out the night before her flight, since I wanted to see her before she left. She turned me down, saying she had plans with some friends from work. No big deal. The morning she was supposed to leave, I texted her, wishing her a safe flight and a great trip. She just liked my message, and we haven't been in touch since. Texting isn't really her thing, so it didn't seem that unusual. I figured she was on her trip and didn't want to interrupt. Then came the strange part. A couple of days into her supposed trip, I noticed that none of her friends had posted anything on Instagram. This was unusual since they typically share a lot, but I let it go. Tonight, though, things took an unexpected turn. Liv posted a video of herself at a show. It looked like fun, and I didn't think much of it until I caught the ending, where the host thanked the audience and named the city near where we live, only about 30 minutes away. The show wasn't in the city she was supposed to be visiting. It was right here. I felt a sinking realization. Liv never went on that trip. She didn't say anything to me, either. Curiosity got the better of me, so I did a bit of snooping on Venmo and saw that her friend had paid her back for the hotel and car rental 2 weeks ago. That means she knew the trip was canceled well before she left and didn't say a word, even when I asked about it. Now, I don't know what to think. I'm out of town this weekend, and this has put a cloud over everything. I feel myself spiraling, second-guessing everything, wondering if I missed any red flags. Is this worth a conversation, or is it a sign that things are already over? I'm trying to understand why she wouldn't mention it. Even if she tells me the trip was canceled when I see her, how does that explain keeping it from me until afterward? Any advice would be helpful. I'm honestly at a loss here. Edit. Just saw a post from her best friend with a picture of the two of them at the show. So, at least I know she wasn't with someone else. But it still doesn't explain why she kept the truth from me. Hey everyone, thanks for the DMs and support. I know some of you want an update. So here it is. Quick recap. A few weeks back, my girlfriend Liv was supposed to head out of town for a conference with friends. I later found out the conference had been canceled, and she didn't go on the trip at all, but she didn't mention it to me. She'd still acted like she was going, and I only found out the truth when her best friend posted a picture of them at a local show. It's been about a month now since this all started. I was spiraling over it, to be honest. After nearly 2 years together, I couldn't bring myself to reach out because I was just too anxious about what I'd uncover. We hadn't spoken for 3 weeks, until yesterday. She casually texted me as if nothing was wrong, asking if I wanted to see a movie. I agreed and finally saw her tonight. In the car, I brought up her trip. She looked totally thrown off, like she wasn't expecting me to remember it after our 3-week silence. She just said it was okay, which confirmed what I'd suspected. I asked her what she'd actually done, and she claimed she'd gone to the conference one day, the one I knew was canceled, and then to a local show. When I asked her to clarify, she insisted it was the same show that had been in our city, not out of town. Since I was driving, I didn't want to get too heated right then. But later, I confronted her for lying about the whole thing. First about the trip, then doubling down about the conference, and then adding a lie about the show. Her reaction was immediate deflection. She said if I was upset, I should imagine how she felt that her conference was canceled, saying it hurt her so much she couldn't bring herself to tell anyone. Then she added that she didn't owe me or anyone else an explanation about her personal life. When I called her out on this behavior, she denied it, which felt ironic given the circumstances. And when I explained how her lies had damaged my trust, she just rolled her eyes, dismissing it by saying it was only a show. This conversation blew open a lot of other things in our relationship. In truth, Liv hadn't treated me well for a long time. She was often cold and distant, barely made an effort to communicate, and never really made me feel like a priority. She didn't show affection or give compliments, though she'd openly crush on male celebrities all the time. She hadn't tried to introduce me to her family or friends. Every time I'd bring these issues up, she'd say she was overwhelmed or make some excuse, promising it would change. I kept giving her chances, but things never improved. This time, she blamed it on a new job, saying that's why she'd been so distant. But something about this time was different. Maybe it was seeing her lie so blatantly or the support and advice I got from you all. I finally had the strength to stand my ground and end things then and there. She begged me to reconsider, to give her one more chance, but there wasn't a tear on her face while I was breaking down. It hurts so much to end things, but I've also started feeling frustrated with myself for putting up with this for so long. Right now, I'm feeling scared and vulnerable. After 2 years, a bit of aging, and some weight gain, I'm worried about starting over and putting myself out there again. I genuinely loved her with everything I had, and it's terrifying to imagine life without her. Part of me even wants to call her back and give her another chance, but I know if she hurt me again, I'd regret not standing by my decision now. I'm hurting a lot, but I also know deep down that it was the right thing to do. Any words of encouragement would mean the world to me right now. Thank you all for everything. Op clarifying on their relationship in comments. Sorry if it was a bit unclear. I've gotten a few comments with mistakes about the timeline of things, so I'll clear it up in this comment since it's one of the newer ones. The trip was supposed to last only 4 days, but of course, Liv never ended up going, which led to my first confrontation with her. She stayed in our hometown the whole time, presumably at her family's place, unless she was seeing someone else. While I did ask her what she was actually doing during what was supposed to be her trip, and during the 3 weeks of no contact, I couldn't bring myself to ask outright if she'd been cheating, and I figured she'd deny it even if she had. Maybe I'm being naive, but I honestly don't believe Liv was cheating on me. She's treated me poorly and didn't seem to care much about our relationship, but she never struck me as the kind of person who'd cheat, especially since she's been on the receiving end before. She's also not very physically open and has always struggled with intimacy unless she's actually dating the person. Her reason for lying about the trip was that she felt really down about missing it and didn't want to talk about it. To me, that sounds like a complete excuse. She could have just told me she didn't go and was feeling hurt about it. I don't think I'll ever know why she couldn't tell me the truth, but I guess I'll have to live with that. In a strange way, I'm almost glad Liv lied. It helped me see things more clearly and finally break up with her. If she'd been upfront about missing the trip, I was actually prepared to talk through the 3 weeks of silence and all the emotional neglect to try to fix our relationship for the 8th or 9th time. So I guess, in a way, it was good she lied to me. Her reason for not contacting me at all during those weeks was that she'd been overwhelmed with her first real job, which she started about a month and a half before the silence. She did send me a handful, maybe 10, TikToks during that time, but those were sent through TikTok, not text. To me, it felt more like breadcrumbs than actually reaching out. Early on, she would spam me with dozens of TikToks when she was thinking of me, so getting one every few days during this silent period felt like a half-hearted attempt to keep me around. This isn't the first time she's gone a few weeks without contacting me either. There have been other times when I felt like the relationship was one-sided, so I'd stop reaching out just to see if she would make an effort. Most times, she'd let a few weeks pass without a word. But she always had an excuse. Her grandmother was in the hospital, she was interviewing for jobs, she was studying for finals, and so on. To be fair, I know Liv tends to shut down under stress and isolate herself, and I've talked to her about this a few times. Each time, she promised she'd work on it. But it hasn't stopped her from seeing her friends plenty of times while claiming to be overwhelmed and in isolation mode. I don't think my hesitation to ask if she was cheating boils down to poor communication on my part, But everyone's entitled to their own take, I guess. Sure, not reaching out myself for those 3 weeks wasn't ideal communication-wise, but after 2 years of giving my all to keep things going and getting little back, I was burnt out. While I didn't ask her outright if she'd cheated, I implied it by questioning what she'd been doing that weekend that she felt the need to hide. She just deflected, saying she'd spent the time feeling sad about the trip, even though she went to that show. I also asked her what she was doing during those 3 weeks. She said she was working her regular 9 to 5 job and a part-time job 2 evenings a week. She gave me a few examples of other things she'd done, like meeting up with friends, spending a weekend at her best friend's place an hour south, which I know is true from social media, and going to a doctor's appointment. I didn't expect a complete agenda, since I'm not her keeper, but she listed maybe 4 or 5 times she was with friends, plus work and her appointment. Like I mentioned before, she's made little effort to involve me in her life beyond our time together. I've only met her family in passing, don't have any way to contact them, and don't follow them on social media, other than her little brother, whom I barely know. I wasn't about to embarrass myself by reaching out to him, asking where she was or why she wasn't checking in with me. At this point, her exact activities during those weeks don't matter as much as her total lack of interest in talking to or seeing me. And to make things worse, my parents, who live in the Southeast, were hit hard by the recent back-to-back hurricanes, with their safety seriously at risk. We're talking up to 12-foot storm surges, and she didn't even check in on me or them during either one. She finally brought it up yesterday, saying something casual like, "Oh, by the way, how are your parents? They were in that state with the hurricanes, right?" That hurt. Not reaching out when it mattered most showed me just how little she cared about me and my family. While other friends and family were reaching out to see if my parents were okay when I'd lost touch with them for a day, the one person I wanted to lean on didn't bother. In the end, the worst part of all this was her lying to my face, then doubling down. If she'd been honest about the conference being canceled when I saw her yesterday, I probably would have still been willing to work on our communication. But her lying lit a fire in me to finally walk away. I wish that made it any easier or less painful, but I guess that's just life. Now on to the next story, story 2. My colleague made fun of me for not going to strip club with him. What was really funny is when his wife found out. I've been in software sales most of my career, and about 10 years back, my company hosted its annual user conference in Las Vegas. If you know anything about these kinds of events, you'll know they're a bit of a free-for-all, especially for salespeople. Our company gave us pretty free rein on expenses as long as they involve clients. Expensive dinners, bottle service at clubs, rounds of drinks. If it kept clients happy, it was fair game. The one unbreakable rule was that we couldn't pay for strippers. That was a hard no from upper management. Of course, I'd been around the block long enough to see the creative workarounds people used to get around this rule. There were guys who knew club managers and would just add the girls' tips to the bottle service tab, like it was any other line item on a receipt. Technically, they weren't paying directly for strippers, but everyone knew what was going on. Even with that loophole, I'd always felt it was a risky move. Going to a strip club with clients just felt like a disaster waiting to happen, unprofessional and, honestly, unnecessary. I was around 27 or 28 at the time, and then there was David. He was one of the older guys in our sales department in his late 40s, and he embodied the stereotype of a sleazy sales guy. If there was a corner to cut or a half-truth he could tell a client, he'd take it. David would overpromise on product features, overcharge, and pretty much sell whatever story he needed to close a deal, regardless of whether it was true. It made life tough for our services and implementation teams, who had to clean up the mess afterward, but David didn't care as long as his commission checks kept coming in. Now, when it came to the annual Vegas conference, David went wild. It was like he had a switch he flipped every time he hit the city limits. He'd take clients to fancy dinners, buy out tables at the hottest clubs, and of course, find every excuse to hit the strip clubs. But David had a unique challenge, a very conservative wife back home. She was deeply religious, and his kids attended a strict Christian school. The family went to church every Sunday without fail, and she absolutely hated these Vegas trips. David used to joke that when he got back, he wasn't even allowed to bring his suitcase into the house. His wife made him leave it in the garage, where she'd do the laundry herself, scrubbing everything down and sanitizing the machine afterward. It was a pretty extreme reaction, but David's story suggested she had good reason not to trust him. On the last night of the conference, David decided to organize a shuttle to one of the big strip clubs. He needed a minimum number of people to secure free entry for the group, so he was doing his best to fill any empty seats. He spotted me talking with a client and swooped over, inviting us to join. I declined politely, but he wouldn't let it go. He started taunting me, implying I was afraid of pretty ladies and joking that I'd probably embarrass myself if one of them even touched me. Normally, that kind of thing wouldn't get under my skin, but he did it right in front of my client, which really ticked me off. I didn't want to make a scene, so I simply replied, "I'm not going because I don't think it's professional." David rolled his eyes and left, and I turned to my client and bought another round. We ended up laughing about David, joking that he was like a cartoon villain in a bad movie. With David gone, I decided to take a solo walk along the strip. It was late, and I knew I had an early morning flight, so I wanted to wind down a bit. If you've ever been to Vegas, you've probably seen the people handing out cards for escort services. They're all over the place, clapping the cards in their hands to get your attention. I'd had a few drinks and thought it'd be funny to take a handful of them. They were just cheap little ads, not exactly high-quality printouts, but they were everywhere. Fast forward to the next morning. David and I both had flights out around the same time, so we ended up at the airport together. He looked terrible. Apparently, he'd been out until 3 or 4 a.m., and he was a mess, completely hungover and bleary-eyed. Meanwhile, I felt pretty great, especially considering how smug I was feeling watching him suffer. At one point, he stumbled off to the bathroom and asked me to keep an eye on his bag. That's when the idea hit me. When he was out of sight, I casually reached into my pocket, grabbed the escort cards I'd collected the night before, and slipped them into his bag. I didn't need to do anything fancy. I just dropped them in between some papers and let them blend in. If there was one thing I knew about David, it was that his wife went through everything when he got home from Vegas. I figured that would be enough to get his attention. And sure enough, it was. A few days later, David came into the office looking stressed and haggard, and he started telling us this wild story. Apparently, his wife had found the cards when she was doing his laundry and flipped out. She didn't believe in divorce, strict religious convictions and all, but this was the last straw for her. She insisted they start going to church 3 times a week and set up weekly counseling sessions with their pastor. To top it off, David had to drop out of his weekly golf league, which if you knew him was a big deal. Golf was his escape, but now he was stuck at home under his wife's watchful eye. The best part? David swore up and down that he didn't know where those cards came from. He was telling us that he didn't remember picking them up and that he must have accidentally put them in his bag while he was out of it. Watching him try to piece together a story and look for sympathy from us was priceless. Of course, I didn't say a word. Looking back, I think David's story summed him up perfectly. He was so reckless and arrogant that he didn't see the blowback coming. And for once, he actually had to face the consequences of his behavior. That one little prank didn't just inconvenience him. It completely upended his life and gave me, and the rest of the office, a reason to smile.